The dim lighting of the Grand Oak, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, cast a golden glow over the polished mahogany tables. The air was thick with murmurs, silverware clinking, and the occasional burst of laughter from well-dressed patrons. It was just another night, or so Jamal Carter thought. Jamal had worked at the Grand Oak for nearly 2 years. He knew the restaurant's unspoken rules better than anyone. Stay professional, stay silent, and above all, never make yourself the center of attention. His job was to blend in, to be efficient but invisible. But tonight was different. As he adjusted his crisp white apron, a hush fell over the restaurant. Heads turned toward the entrance. The air seemed to shift, an electric charge crackling through the room. And then Jamal saw him, Michael Jordan. The legend himself strode through the doors, his presence as commanding as ever. He wasn't just an athlete. He was a symbol, a god among men. Some of the guests whispered excitedly. Others tried to play it cool, but the energy in the room had changed. The restaurant manager, Mr. Whitaker, a stern man with slicked-back hair and a permanent frown, straightened his tie and approached the basketball icon with a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Jordan, what an honor," Whitaker gushed, motioning for the hostess to lead him to a private table. "We'll make sure you have the best experience tonight." Jordan gave a polite nod, his expression unreadable. Jamal had no expectation of serving him. VIP guests were usually handled by the senior staff. But as luck would have it, or perhaps fate, one of the head waiters called in sick that night. The floor was busy, and before he knew it, Jamal was being pushed toward Jordan's table. His palms were suddenly damp. He took a breath. Just another guest, he told himself. Treat him with respect, do the job, and move on. As he approached the table, Jordan looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment. It was strange. In that instant, Jamal felt something unspoken pass between them. "Good evening, sir," Jamal said, his voice steady. "Welcome to the Grand Oak. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Jordan studied him for a second longer than necessary before nodding. "Water's fine." The meal went smoothly. Jamal remained professional, but something about the interaction felt different. Unlike most celebrities who barely acknowledged their servers, Jordan was present. He thanked Jamal each time he refilled his glass, made eye contact when ordering, and even cracked a joke when Jamal nearly knocked over the breadbasket. "Almost lost the assist there," Jordan smirked. Jamal chuckled. "I'd be benched for that one, no doubt." Jordan grinned. It was a small moment, a fleeting exchange, but it was real. As the evening went on, Jamal noticed something else. Some of the other waiters were watching him. Mr. Whitaker, in particular, seemed to be keeping an eye on his every move. At the end of the meal, Jordan left a generous tip and gave Jamal a nod of appreciation before walking out. Jamal exhaled, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. He had done his job well. It should have been just another night. But as he walked back to the kitchen, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The next morning, he would learn just how right he was. Jamal woke up feeling lighter than usual. The night before had been a rare moment of pride. Serving Michael Jordan, exchanging a few words, and feeling seen, really seen by someone like him. It wasn't just about waiting tables. It was about respect. The sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of his small apartment. It was just another workday, or so he thought. By the time he arrived at the Grand Oak, something felt different. The usual morning chatter among the staff was subdued. Some of the other waiters glanced at him and then quickly looked away. There was tension in the air, a quiet sense of something being off. Before he could shake the uneasy feeling, A voice cut through the restaurant. "Carter, in my office. Now." Jamal turned to see Mr. Whitaker standing by the kitchen doors, arms crossed, eyes cold. His stomach twisted. He had seen that look before. The office was a small, sterile space tucked behind the main dining hall. A single window let in weak light, but the room felt suffocating. Mr. Whitaker closed the door behind him and leaned against his desk. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, his voice clipped and emotionless. Jamal hesitated. He had no idea. He had done everything right last night. He had been professional, respectful, precise. "No, sir," he said carefully. Whitaker exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if Jamal had disappointed him in some unspeakable way. "You overstepped," he said. "You got too comfortable. You made a scene." Jamal blinked, his heart beginning to race. "A scene?" His voice was steady, but confusion was creeping in fast. "Do you have any idea how this place runs?" Whitaker snapped. "We cater to a certain clientele, Carter. They expect a certain level of service, not familiarity." Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears. Was this about the way he spoke to Jordan? The light joke they exchanged? The eye contact? He tried to keep his voice even. "With all due respect, sir, I was doing my job." Mr. Jordan seemed happy with the service. "I didn't do anything inappropriate." Whitaker's lips pressed into a thin line. He picked up a folder from his desk, flipping it open as if there were some official report on Jamal's so-called misconduct. "You were seen laughing at his table, making conversation, acting like you belonged there." His voice dripped with something sharp, something unspoken but clear. Jamal felt heat rise in his chest. He had known racism all his life, sometimes loud and violent, sometimes quiet and insidious. This was the latter. This was the kind that wrapped itself in professionalism and policy, but at its core it was the same old game. "I was doing my job," he said again, slower this time. Whitaker closed the folder and sighed, as if this was exhausting for him. "This isn't the place for you, Carter," he said. "I think it's best we part ways." Jamal stared at him. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. He had been fired before. He had lost jobs for reasons that made sense. But this was something else. "You're firing me," he said, more to himself than to Whitaker, "for being professional, for treating a guest with respect." Whitaker's face remained unreadable. "Collect your things." Jamal felt his hands clench at his sides. A dozen things ran through his mind. Anger, humiliation, the urge to argue, to push back. But he knew how that story ended. He had seen it before. A black man raising his voice, demanding answers, getting nothing but the weight of the system pressing down on him harder. So he swallowed it. He turned, walked out of the office, and stepped onto the restaurant floor for what he now realized was the last time. Some of the other waiters avoided his gaze. A few whispered. Jamal grabbed his bag from the back room, his body moving on autopilot. His thoughts were a whirlwind, a storm of disbelief and anger crashing against the walls of his mind. As he stepped outside, the cold morning air hit his face like a slap. He was unemployed, just like that, for doing the right thing, for treating Michael Jordan like a human being instead of a spectacle. Jamal exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the crisp air. He had no job, no backup plan, and no idea what came next. But as he stood there, staring at the city stretching out before him, a single question burned in his mind. Why had this happened? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do now? Jamal spent the rest of the day walking. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to move, to breathe, to put distance between himself and what had happened that morning. The streets of Chicago were alive with people going about their business, unaware that his world had just crumbled. He passed coffee shops, office buildings, people laughing at bus stops. The normalcy of it all made him feel even more out of place. By the time he reached his apartment, his feet ached, but his mind was no quieter. He dropped onto his worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling. No job. No explanation that made sense. Nothing but the anger sitting heavy in his chest. His phone buzzed beside him. He ignored it at first. Probably another bill reminder or some spam call. It buzzed again. Then a third time. He sighed, grabbing it without looking at the screen. Hello. There was a pause. A short silence that felt strangely deliberate. Then a voice, deep and unmistakable. This is Michael. Jamal sat up so fast the couch creaked under him. Michael. As in Michael Jordan? His mouth went dry. He opened it to speak, but nothing came out. You still there? The voice asked. Jamal forced his brain to work. Yes, I'm here. Another pause. Then Jordan's voice again, calm but firm. I heard what happened. Jamal closed his eyes. Of course he had. News traveled fast in certain circles, and when the biggest name in basketball was involved, it traveled even faster. I don't know what to say, Jamal admitted. His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to. You don't have to say anything, Jordan said. I already know. Jamal swallowed. He could hear something in Jordan's tone. Not just sympathy, but frustration. They fired you for nothing, Jordan continued. For doing your job. For showing respect. Jamal let out a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, well, I guess I learned the hard way that respect isn't the same for everybody. There was silence on the line. Not an awkward one, but the kind that carried weight. Then Jordan spoke again. Meet me tomorrow. Jamal blinked. What? Tomorrow. 11 a.m. I'll send you the address. Jamal's heart pounded. He wanted to ask why, wanted to ask what this was about. But the words wouldn't come. You free? Jordan asked. Jamal almost laughed again. Free? He had nothing but time now. Yeah, he said. I'm free. Good, Jordan said. See you then. The call ended. Jamal sat there, staring at his phone. His mind was racing. Michael Jordan had just called him. Personally. And tomorrow he was going to meet him. For the first time all day, Jamal felt something other than anger or frustration. Hope. Jamal barely slept that night. His mind kept replaying the phone call, the sound of Jordan's voice, the weight behind his words. Every time he closed his eyes, a new question surfaced. What did Jordan want? Why had he called personally? What could he possibly have to offer? By morning, the nerves had settled into a steady hum beneath his skin. He dressed carefully, choosing the best outfit he had. A crisp button-down, dark slacks, polished shoes. He needed to look like he belonged, even if he wasn't sure that he did. The address Jordan had sent led him to a sleek, glass-walled office building in downtown Chicago. The kind of place where powerful people made decisions that changed lives. As he stepped into the lobby, a receptionist greeted him with a knowing smile. Mr. Carter? She asked. He nodded, surprised she knew his name. Follow me, she said. She led him through a set of polished doors, down a quiet hallway, and into a private lounge. The space was elegant but comfortable, with leather chairs and a view of the city stretching out below. Jamal barely had time to take it all in before the door opened again. Michael Jordan walked in. This was different from the night at the restaurant. No crowds, no cameras, just two men in a quiet room. Jordan moved with the same confidence Jamal had seen on the court. He didn't waste time with small talk. He sat down across from him, leaned forward slightly, and looked him straight in the eye. "You probably think I brought you here to offer you another job at some restaurant," Jordan said. Jamal hesitated. That had crossed his mind, but now that he was here, it didn't feel right. Jordan shook his head. "That's not why you're here." Jamal sat up a little straighter. "You know what I saw that night?" Jordan continued. "I saw a man who carried himself with dignity, who treated me like a person, not just a paycheck. That doesn't happen often." Jamal didn't know what to say. Jordan leaned back in his chair. "I've been in your shoes. Not exactly, but close enough. I know what it's like to have people decide your worth before you even open your mouth. I know what it's like to be pushed aside for doing nothing wrong." Jamal swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. Jordan's eyes didn't waver. "You were never meant to stay in that restaurant. That place was too small for you." Jamal felt his pulse quicken. "I have business ventures, real estate, investments, companies that need people who know how to handle pressure, how to read a room, how to work with people." Jordan paused. "I think you could be one of those people." Jamal's breath caught in his throat. "Are you serious?" he asked. Jordan nodded. "I don't hand out favors. I invest in people who deserve it." "You want in?" Jamal felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The job he lost, the humiliation, the uncertainty. It had all led him here. He nodded slowly. "Yes." Jordan smiled just slightly. "Good," he said. "Let's get to work." 6 months had passed. Jamal Carter stepped onto the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, dressed in a sharp navy suit, the kind he once thought he would never wear. His reflection stared back at him from the glass windows of the high-rise buildings as he walked toward a familiar block. A lot had changed since that night at the Grand Oak. At first, stepping into Jordan's business world had been overwhelming. He had gone from balancing trays in a restaurant to sitting in meetings with executives, learning about investments, marketing strategies, and brand management. It was a crash course in everything he had never been given access to before. But Jamal adapted. He worked harder than ever, proving that he belonged in a room full of power players. Now, he wasn't just a former waiter. He was a part of something bigger. He rounded a corner and stopped in front of the restaurant. The Grand Oak still stood exactly as it had the last time he walked out of it. The gold-lettered sign gleamed in the midday sun. The same polished wood doors. The same pristine white tablecloths visible through the windows. But everything was different now. Jamal wasn't there to work. He wasn't there to beg for a job back. He was just passing by, but fate had other plans. The door swung open, and out stepped Mr. Whitaker. Jamal froze. For a split second, the restaurant manager didn't recognize him. Then his face changed. His posture stiffened. His eyes darted to the tailored suit, the confidence in Jamal's stride, the absence of an apron in his hands. Jamal met his gaze, calm and steady. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Carter," he said, his tone unsure. Jamal simply nodded. "Whitaker." A flicker of something crossed the man's face. Surprise. Maybe even regret. Jamal didn't stay long enough to find out. He had nothing to prove to him. He turned and walked away. As he moved through the city, he let the moment settle inside him. He had lost a job that night, but he had gained a future. The life he had now was something he never could have imagined back then. And in the end, that was the best revenge of all.